Snow fell in slow, silvery drifts, softening the hard edges of the frontier town as dusk settled, like a hush over the land. The last train of the day hissed steam into the cold air, its iron belly still groaning, as if reluctant to let her go. Evelyn Harper stepped down from the carriage, one gloved hand tight around a battered suitcase, the other pressed against her chest as though she could steady the thrum of her own heart. Her long, dark green dress brushed the snow-dusted platform, lace trim catching pale light that seeped through the dusk. She paused there, fragile against the vast white wilderness, as curious eyes turned to follow her. The town watched her as though she were a spectacle, an arrival both expected and unwelcome. A boy whispered to his mother, tugging at her skirt, "That's the mail-order bride." The words rippled outward, carried by the brittle air, and Evelyn felt them cling to her like burrs. She lowered her gaze, cheeks burning, though the cold wind stung just as fiercely. By the log cabin near the station, a man stood apart, broad-shouldered beneath a dark brown coat. His hat cast his face in shadow, though the lines of grief carved into him were plain. Jonas Callahan, 38, widower rancher. She knew his name only from letters penned in a careful, spare hand. He did not stride forward to greet her. He only tipped his head, a small gesture that carried both acknowledgment and restraint. Evelyn tightened her grip on the suitcase. 1,000 doubts swarmed inside her. Asterisk, what am I to him? A wife, a servant, a stranger to fill an empty place. Asterisk. She tried to move, but her legs faltered. The weight of the moment pressed down, heavier than the snow that blanketed the roofs. Then came the soft crunch of smaller boots in the snow. A child emerged from the cabin's shadow, no taller than Evelyn's waist. She wore a light blue dress with a white apron, clutching a worn teddy bear as though it were a shield. Her hair was a tumble of brown curls, cheeks pink from the cold. The little girl stopped before Evelyn, staring up with solemn, unflinching eyes. The silence stretched. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she asked, "Can you be Mama?" Evelyn froze. Her heart stuttered. Of all the words she had expected, a brusque order, a polite introduction, a distant courtesy, none pierced her as deeply as those four. The world around her dulled to a blur. The shifting of boots on the boardwalk, the mutter of townsfolk, even the hiss of the train cooling behind her. All she saw was the child's fragile hope woven into that question. Her hand trembled as she lowered it, fingers brushing against the small palm that had reached for hers. The child's skin was cold, yet the touch radiated a warmth Evelyn had not known in years. She could not find words. Instead, she squeezed gently, and in that wordless answer, something inside her cracked open. From where he stood, Jonas shifted, his jaw tight, his eyes unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. Pride and pain warred silently in him. He had brought a woman from far away, yet he offered her nothing more than space and silence. Evelyn could feel his watchfulness like a weight, as though he too was waiting for an answer she could not yet speak. The child, Lydia, leaned closer, placing the teddy bear in Evelyn's lap as if granting her a role not yet claimed. Evelyn blinked against sudden tears. She was not prepared for this. The innocence of a child's need, the unspoken plea of a man who had known loss, the judgment of a town that measured her worth before she had taken a single step inside it. Jonas finally moved, slow and deliberate. He walked toward them, boots crunching over the frost-hardened ground, and stopped only a pace away. His voice, when it came, was low and rough. "It's a long walk to the cabin. You'll catch cold sitting out here." Evelyn rose, still clutching Lydia's small hand. Her suitcase felt lighter now, though nothing about her burden had changed. She fell into step beside Jonas, the three of them moving as a strange, silent procession through the snowbound street. The lantern above the cabin door flickered gold against the gathering dark, throwing their shadows long behind them. Inside, warmth and wood smoke wrapped around her. The cabin was plain, walls bare save for a cross and a rifle. The air smelled of pine and ash. Lydia tugged her toward the small cot tucked by the fire, where a patchwork quilt lay folded. She nestled beneath it, whispering sleepy words Evelyn couldn't quite catch, and clung to her new hand with quiet trust. Jonas lingered in the doorway, shoulders filling the frame, his presence both protective and uncertain. "You don't owe us anything," he said, voice quiet, as though confessing something to the flames. "If it's too much, the train runs twice a week." Evelyn turned her face toward the firelight, shadows veiling her expression. She wanted to speak, to say she was afraid, that she was ashamed, that she didn't know if she could belong. But the words tangled in her throat. Instead, she let the silence stretch, broken only by the pop of resin in the fire. Her hand remained in Lydia's, small fingers curled tightly around her own. Snow whispered against the windows, a world of white pressing close outside. Evelyn's heart thudded in the hush. She had never been so uncertain, never so afraid, and yet, in the warmth of that small hand, never so unwilling to leave. The firelight flickered across her face, and for a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to wonder. Perhaps she had not been summoned here to be merely a wife, but to be something far more dangerous, to be needed. Days slipped by like snow melting under weak winter sun, slow and unremarkable on the surface, yet beneath each hour something unseen shifted. Evelyn rose early, her breath clouding in the chill cabin air, and bent herself to the rhythm of Jonas's world. She hauled water from the well until her arms trembled, scrubbed the soot-blackened pans until her knuckles split, stitched worn shirts by lantern light until her eyes blurred. Every task was proof of her resolve, but in the corners of her mind lived the whispers she could not silence. Asterisk, you don't belong. You were bought. You can still run. Asterisk. The town reminded her of it at every turn. In the mercantile, women turned their heads, their voices low and sharp as knives. She won't last a season. A hired womb, nothing more. The words lodged in her chest, colder than the wind on her cheeks as she trudged back through the snow. Lydia's small hand clung to her skirt, and Evelyn held her chin high, though shame scalded her skin. Jonas never defended her in public. He bore the gossip with the same stoicism he carried into every burden of his life. Yet in private, his silence felt less like neglect and more like a shield, an unspoken way of granting her the dignity to stand or fall by her own strength. His actions spoke where his mouth would not. One night, Evelyn found her torn glove, mended with clumsy stitches, left wordlessly on the table. Another evening, she set stew before him, humble and thin, and he ate with a slowness that honored her effort. They spoke little, yet each gesture seemed to fill a space words could never reach. It was Lydia who bridged the gulf. The child's devotion grew fierce, unrelenting. She slipped her hand into Evelyn's at every chance, her presence a declaration the town could not ignore. Evelyn found herself softening, not in grand gestures, but in the quiet rituals of care, brushing Lydia's hair before bed, tucking her quilt close, pressing a kiss to her brow when the child pretended already to be asleep. It was dangerous how quickly love took root when she had sworn to keep her heart guarded. But love, in that place, was never safe. One bitter night, voices spilled from a saloon as Evelyn walked past, the scent of smoke and cheap whiskey curling around her. She heard her name tossed into the air, like kindling. A ranch hand, drunk and cruel, laughed loud enough for the whole street to hear. Jonas Callahan couldn't find a woman in all Wyoming, so he ordered one like he'd order a plow. Laughter followed, hard and mean, carrying on the wind. Evelyn froze, every inch of her burning though the night was freezing. Her eyes stung, and without waiting for Jonas, she turned and fled into the dark. She found herself by the railroad tracks, suitcase at her feet, lantern light flickering against the rails. The same rails that had carried her here could just as easily carry her away. Her breath shook in the stillness. When Jonas's boots crunched over the snow behind her, she didn't lift her gaze. "You don't have to stay where you ain't wanted," she whispered. He stopped just behind her, close enough that she could feel the weight of his silence. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough, as though torn from a place he seldom touched. "You're not unwanted. I don't know how to ask someone to stay when I've already lost too much." The truth hung heavy between them, fragile as spun glass. Evelyn's throat ached with words she could not form. Her fingers tightened around the handle of the suitcase. Part of her longed to flee the shame, the judgment, the loneliness. Another part longed to believe him, to believe in something steadier than fear. Then came the sound of small footsteps, frantic in the snow. Lydia burst from the dark, her little feet bare, Teddy Bear dragging behind. Tears streaked her cheeks, glistening in the lantern glow. She flung herself into Evelyn's arms with a desperate cry. "Don't go. You are Mama." Evelyn held the child close, her heart breaking open beneath the weight of such innocent certainty. Jonas stood just beyond, hat pulled low, eyes glistening in a way no man would dare admit. He did not move, did not speak, but everything he felt poured from the silence between them. Evelyn gathered Lydia against her, suitcase forgotten, the rails behind her vanishing into shadow. She turned back toward the cabin, the child clinging to her with all the trust of a heart too young to doubt. Jonas walked beside them, not touching, not pressing, but close enough that his presence wrapped around her like a vow unspoken. Snow whispered against the earth as they returned to the glow of the lantern waiting by the cabin door. Evelyn stepped across the threshold, and for the first time since her arrival, she did not feel like a stranger trespassing on another's life. She felt as though she had stepped into the fragile beginning of her own.